She has my prayers as she goes to Washington to I did call Senator Cindy Hyde-Smith. I congratulated her on her victory tonight. And she has my prayers as she goes to Washington to unite a very divided Mississippi. And she has my prayers and my willingness to help her to do that. So, well, this is not the result that we were hoping for. I'm very proud. This historic campaign. And I'm so very grateful for all the support that we received across Mississippi, in the churches, in the union halls, in the corporate boardrooms, in the classrooms. Just talking to you, shaking your hands and looking you in the eye and giving me the thumbs up. I really, really appreciate it. Do you know that we built the largest grassroots organization our state has ever seen in a generation? We did that through a coalition of voters, white and black, who shared our belief that Mississippi's future will be brighter than Mississippi's past. So make no mistake, tonight is the beginning. Tonight is the end. Those of you out there who I met in these universities, who looked at our campaign and looked under the hood, and maybe decide one day that you want to run for office, go for it. We want this campaign to be your legacy. Because when this many people show up, when this many people stand up, when this many people speak up, it is not a loss, it's a movement. So we are not going to stop moving our state forward, and I'm going to leave it to you and to those who come behind to look forward to finding a new way to do that, to move our state forward. So I just want to thank my family on the stage here. For standing with me, for putting up with me. You know, this was an 8-month campaign now. We didn't have 2 years or 6 years. We had 8 months to do this. And I want to thank my wife, Portia. She did a lot.
We love you, Portia.
I want to thank my campaign staff, the best campaign staff in Mississippi. And build an organization that's the envy of Mississippi. And I want to thank all the volunteers. Those who manned the phones, those who knocked on doors because you believed. And all the young people that got involved and were energized by this campaign. I want to just tell you, continue to believe. So we'll leave the stage now. But this is a movement. And this movement is not going to end. For a new Mississippi, a more united Mississippi, and a Mississippi where everyone, regardless of race, of party, of religion, feels their vote. Thank you so much.
28th of November 2018. The title of our episode, Good Did Not Win in Mississippi. We are piggybacking off of the Google marker, at least that's what they made public, or was it Facebook? Google, do no evil. Now the question is, this is petty moralizing, or is this a basic part of society? Well, you can have it either way. In Mike Espy's campaign, and you just heard from Mike Espy in his speech at the end of his campaign, calling his campaign a historic campaign. There's no doubt about that. We'll get some of the numbers in here in a minute. The monopoly media has basically tried to report it as a 10-point race. It's not a 10-point race. It was either 6 or 7 points between the two, much closer than the polls had indicated. And there's not been much polling in Mississippi. But what happened there was that, as Mr. Espy stated, it was a grassroots movement, something not seen in Mississippi. And this is one of the things that people have to comprehend from a ground level. Getting a grassroots effort together, and it was in 8 months. He lent his campaign $100,000. But when he started out, no doubt his team did not imagine they would come this close. Nor did they imagine at the time that they would get into even the runoff itself. But the situation was McDaniel, who had run before in Mississippi and almost won against Thad Cochran, and forced Thad Cochran into a runoff. And Thad Cochran had to go to the followers of O.J. Simpson, in other words, the African-American community, solidly Democrats in Mississippi. The Democratic Party in Mississippi is primarily African Americans. Thus, he was reelected and had to leave, as Cochran had to leave because of illness. So what was at stake here? We had an appointed Senator Hyde-Smith with a dubious background of making various racist statements, including saying she would be at the front seat of a hanging, down for the hearing. But this was very carefully planned because they needed the people from the cabinet, the Klan, local Klan headquarters, and various other fellow travelers to energize this election, because they knew it would be a very, very close election. And if you noticed, we had in the edited version of DJ Trump's stump speech, and also of Cindy Hyde-Smith, and she referred to your conservative values. That is nothing more than a dog whistle, as they call it, to white supremacy, no doubt about it. And various other things, not only conservative values, but the pro-life that got more applause in the audience than anything else. The issue of immigration and build the wall, and then they had chance of USA, Trump moving them on. But DJ Trump having to go to a place like Mississippi on literally the night before the election and make 2 stops is very, very unusual, because that's a state he won't handily, and the conservatives have set up camp there literally for many, many years in Mississippi, I believe since the 80s, since Reagan. So in other words, the last Democrats they had, but I believe he changed, old John Stennis, you pretty much forget who they were. But those were the old Dixiecrats. They've long since gone, changed labels. Hyde-Smith was a Democrat up to, I think, a few years ago. And she changed over to be a Republican. She's out of Brookhaven. That's about 60 miles from Jackson. But followers of O.J. Simpson lurk in and around Brookhaven. That's why Hyde-Smith parents sent her to one of these so-called Christian academies. She sent her daughter to a Christian academy. That was to avoid any contact with African Americans. There's no doubt about that. Dressing up in Confederate hats and various other things. to tell the people that I'm with you. The governor going out of his way to proclaim Confederate holidays, and then had the audacity to go over and open the Civil Rights Museum. Now, that was where Mike Espy had his meeting tonight, and it turned out to be his farewell speech. I won't call it a concession speech, because what is happening more and more in these campaigns is with Stacey Abrams. The campaign turns into a movement, and social movements, for people that have studied social movements themselves, are many times a precursor to a political party. It's sort of like the Occupy movement. Well, the energy out of the Occupy movement, when it was subverted by the corporate operations and by direct police suppression, we still have our old, and you'll see us wearing our 1% badge. What that basically means is 1% of the people control. Now, that doesn't mean they operate the economy. They basically control it. It's more like about 2%. But they have their lackeys, and their lackeys go out and control things. There's no doubt about that. And we also see that DJ Trump was talking about the economy. Well, the economy is very, very tenuous. It's not an economy that one can say is forward-looking. It is not. The recent announcements by GM, some 15,000 workers over 2019 will lose their jobs. But what's interesting there, history was that factory workers lost their jobs, primarily in these layoffs situations. But this time around, it will be salaried or white-collar types. One of the officials of the company have made the statement that we are now going to programmers and not engineers. So engineers, assistants, engineers, etc., they will be laid off or made redundant in the U.S. and in Canada. So this is one of the things that's happening here, and it's a continual situation. It's not just something that has just appeared. It's part of the story of the U.S. economy and the economy as a whole. When you look at the global economy, the G20, of course, will be meeting, but the situation is very tenuous. They are faced with the old Adam Smith type maximum supply demand. Well, there's supply out there, not as much a demand because of imbalance within the markets. We won't spend a lot of time on that, but we'll go now to, as we have been doing lately, to the San Diego Union Tribune. They are one of the outlets that do the best programming reporting on the issue of economic migrants. Money resources running out in Tijuana. Migrant shelter is the headline here. The contact reporter is Gustavo Celis. Anyway, sounding alarm, the mayor of Tijuana said the city has enough resources to support the Central American migrant caravan for 2 more days, and beyond that, there's no guarantee. We will decide what to do when we get there. That is Juan Emmanuel Gastelum said during a press conference on Tuesday. He vowed not to divert tax dollars away from city services, while asking the federal government in Mexico to send more money and more support. Now, they're changing regimes in Mexico. Enrique Peña Nieto is leaving office on Friday, and Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador will start on the 1st, which is on Saturday. Again, the message: we won't compromise the resources. According to the treasurer, Ricardo Chavera, I hope I'm pronouncing it right, said the city spends about 600 pesos a day supporting the migrant caravan, or roughly $30,000. Not a lot. The money is tight right now because the city is near the end of its fiscal year. In Bajo, California, officials said there are about 8,000 members of a Central American caravan in that state. Roughly 6,800 in Tijuana and 1,200 in Mexicali. That is Bajo, California. Let me get the rest of this state here. Majority of caravan members in Tijuana sleep in an outdoor sporting complex. In the city's Zeno Norte neighborhood, as more immigrants arrive, space in the makeshift shelter gets more crowded. There are more than 5,800 in the shelter as of Monday night. Families set up tents anywhere they can, and including under bleachers. So it's a large stadium. Many are unsure, the immigrants, unsure where they will be able to ask for, when they will be able to ask for asylum in the U.S. They have to first get there. Immigrants' situation got more hostile. That was on Sunday. We reported on that. We won't finish on that, but the federal officials from the local branch of the National Institute of Migration declined to speak. So in other words, they have nothing to say. So that is the situation in Tijuana. And it continues on. While on the other side of the border, U.S. Border Patrol officials defend the use of gas. Pledge to deploy it again if the situation arises. They have a picture here of American soldiers behind what is normally called razor wire. It also said they did not target women or children during the incident Sunday afternoon, but if migrants huddle in Tijuana and choose to insert themselves into violent crowds that attack officers with rockets and bottles, they'll be subject to retaliation. That they were firing tear gas at men, women, and children. Seeking asylum is a violation of human rights. That's according to Mary Maggie McCarthy of the National Immigrant Justice Center, said in a statement, urging Americans to call their congressional representatives. Good luck on that one. And let me finish this up here. The Transportation Security Administration banned pepper spray from airline flights because of the damage it presented to the public when dispensed in a controlled environments like an aeroplane. Now, the Organization for Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, the international group established to implement the Chemical Weapons Convention, adopted in 200 countries in the 1990s, classifies pepper spray and tear gas as chemical agents that can cause serious health effects. In the late 80s, an investigation by the General Accounting Office found that improper use of tear gas could result in fatalities when used in enclosed spaces and aimed directly to crowds, although medical evidence hasn't bore all of it out yet. Hundreds made it through dilapidated fences, and that figures, but were forced back into Mexico by the Homeland Security people. There are 8,000 Central American migrants in the Mexican state of Baja California. We just talked about that. A little bit of cutting and pasting going on here. Homeland Security said they have identified at least 600 criminals amongst the caravan, but not clear on what information that's based on. Again, fairly dubious as to where they are in the situation. Let's go now to Jacksonville, Mississippi, and we'll get... We'll do Mother Jones here. Firstly, the headline here is Republican Cindy Hyde-Smith, but just won the Mississippi Senate race despite a series of controversies. She will be the first woman elected from that state because she was appointed. The victory for Hyde-Smith has been serving in the Senate, was appointed to replace Fat Cochran. We talked about this. First woman to represent Mississippi in the Senate. She will now be the first woman elected to the chamber from the state. Her opponent, meanwhile, would have been the first African-American senator from Mississippi. That's Mike Espy. In a three-way race, we talked about the Tea Party, Firebrand Chris McDaniel. Up until the general election, Hyde-Smith was considered a fairly predictable candidate, especially in contrast to McDaniel, and her platform centered around allegiance to DJ Trump. According to the 538, she had the track record to prove her loyalty. She voted in line with Trump 100% of the time, no doubt about that. Trump wasn't there enough to repay her. But Trump wasn't there enough to repay her support. He was also there to put her embattled candidacy, pull it across the finish line. In a stop in Tupelo, we covered the one in Biloxi. She was recorded saying, this is the public hearing comment that she had. Missteps fueled hopes, both national and local Democrats, and fed fears amongst obviously Republicans that they were slipping away. He didn't have time. It did start to slip away. There was no doubt about that. So there's a Mississippi that I want to be part of, one diverse, one inclusive, one different experience. He said, this is Mike Espy. He was from, he integrated an all white school in Yazoo. That's where he's from in 1969. Despite all of this, she pulled off the victory at Hyde-Smith. No doubt about that. She would have pulled off the victory anyway. And this, what you heard was from, let me just get this in, WJTV 12 in Jackson, Mississippi. They are falling back on the Associated Press, and you heard his speech from the Civil Rights Museum there in Jackson, Mississippi. Let me just get the official numbers here. We have now 90. Let me make sure this is 99% of the vote. Just make sure it didn't update. This is real clear. There, yeah, still 99% of the vote. Mike Espy had 405,486 votes, or 46.1% of the vote. Hyde-Smith had 474,471 votes for 53.9%. So in other words, she got 53.9%, not as reported. Mike Espy, 46.1%, was more than the polls had him in the, I believe, in the first round. Where was he? He was in the 40s. I think he had 41% in the first round of voting there in Mississippi. Let me just go back here and check on that and see where we were. This is the runoff. The actual election itself, let's see. No, we're not getting it. In fact, if we look at Mississippi here, the Mississippi here we go. The Mississippi special election, Mike Espy had 40%, 40.6%. Hyde-Smith had 41.5% in that special election. And so Mike Espy actually did, what was it? I have to keep going back here. Here we go. He had 40.6% And she had, in the special election in Mississippi, she had 41.5%. So she improved from 41 to, let's see here, 40, what was it? To 53. So you can see the improvement there. Mike Espy improved about 5 percentage points in his totals there. So it was an interesting race. It was a fight, but the race has turned now into a movement which has changed things in the state of Mississippi. The same situation as you have in Georgia, but Stacey Abrams has turned her election, a campaign, into a movement also. So in other words, what we're seeing here is a fight for the future, not the past. And that is also in Florida. Much of the grassroots work has to be done in those particular areas. An article here, we're not going to read it, but it is in the New York Times about the billionaire Jack Ma. He's the richest person in China, and he's a member of the Chinese Communist Party. His Alibaba Group is what he has. And he was listed as people who made extraordinary contributions to the Chinese society. And a little editorial writing here on the part of the Times saying that though publicly expound the principles of Karl Marx and not followed, they try to claim the Chinese Communist Party largely abandoned collectivism doctrine in the era following Mao Zedong. Well, not true. Period there. And from some character, Dean of Humanities and Science at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology referred to the party pitch. It doesn't make you want to join the party too. Anyway, Jack Mo is a party member, and he didn't decline to comment Alibaba. But the wealthy in China, Mr. Mo and his family has a net worth of $39 billion or 270 renminbi. Anyway, that is the line, as one would say, and there are many more people in China that are members of the party. In fact, at one time, the Chinese Communist Party has changed, invited middle-class types that had become party members. That was during the regime of Mr. Deng. That has since disappeared. Free parties of private enterprises are 1.9 million. There are free party members required to set up a party cell, and that's according there. But that's a fairly small number out of 2 billion people. And they go on to talk about Mr. Deng, she said, referring to the party leader who ultimately governed China during the early years of reform. That was in the 70s and the 80s. The disclosure also draws attention because Mr. Mao in the past tended to keep his distance from the government, but now he's closer and closer under President Xi. So in other words, things do in fact change. There's no doubt about that. Let me go to this is CTV News. General GM will affect 14,000 workers. This was an older across North America. Is cutting thousands of jobs in a major restructuring campaign. This is headlined Detroit by the Canadian broadcast company. The layoffs come amidst the backdrop of a trade war between the U.S. and China. Mary Barra, she's the CEO there of GE, announced that it will cut as many as 14,000 workers in North America, put 5 plants up for possible closure. That's not all been decided there. And these are the numbers we want to get. Around 3,300 blue-collar workers could lose their jobs in the U.S., another 2,600 in Canada. But some U.S. workers could transfer to other plants. The cuts include 8,000 white-collar workers, or 15% of GM's white-collar workforce. So there'll be far more of those, and Barra said that as cars and trucks become more complex, GM will need more computer coders, but fewer engineers who work on internal combustion engines. Well, that's true. Internal combustion engines will be on their way out, except for some of the SUVs and what they have. But a long way down the road as they go to electrified cars and autonomous driven cars, there will be less and less of that. They do not have engines within them. Let me just very quickly here update myself. Canadian Post, incidentally, is on strike in Canada. We'll get that. We'll go ahead and cover it, 'cause we've done several episodes here on the U.S. Postal as back to work legislation forced the end. And this is where rotating strikes by the Canadian postal workers. The agency's warning customers to expect lengthy delays for some types of deliveries. The Canadian Post said the partial deliveries will continue, but will be delayed during the peak season and holiday season into January of next year. Canadian Post workers have been legislated back to work. The Canadian Postal Workers Union has told its members that it will soon begin a campaign of mobilization, demonstrations, and nonviolent civil disobedience. We were talking about this at college tonight in a race class, a class that I take, and very interesting there that to hit the streets is it, and you're seeing more and more people, and be in Canada or wherever, are going to the streets and not to the political parties. Political parties obviously not in a position where they can deliver things. From the Public News Service, we have an article here out of the state of Ohio. 1 in 5 Ohioans turn to retail clinics. You've seen for quick care. This is out of Columbus. The Ohio Health Issues poll released by Interactive for Health found that about 1 in 5 Ohioans, that's 18%, have visited a retail clinic. I've done that before to get my blood pressure checked before the Affordable Care Act. Anyway, this is Dr. Miller Sullivan, Director of the Franklin County, that is Columbus, said having a regular health care home is important for management and prevention of diseases. However, he contends that these clinics are proven to be a cost-effective alternative to the emergency room, no doubt about that. A lot of medical centers have also set up clinics in addition to their emergency rooms to take care of colds and hypertension checks, diabetes checks. Sullivan said retail health clinics, especially popular during cold and flu season. They can give you a flu shot, and if you're over 65, that shot is free. While just 4% of Ohio adults say they have never used. Now this is telemedicine here. Nearly 6 in 10 said they open to trying it. Now, also this is telemedicine, which is a different situation. On a telephone, someone can say, "Oh, I have a sore throat," and can you really diagnose them with strep throat by looking at the throat and hearing what they say? The answer is no, he said. this is beyond the prevalence of telemedicine there, and the only thing they can do is answer questions about your symptoms and how long you've had your symptoms, etc. There's no magic bullet out here, but if you go to one of these types of clinics associated with an actual medical center, then they can reroute you either to the emergency room, which is normally next door, and also the community clinics, not mentioned here, but the community clinics usually have the facilities there to diagnose many things. They have x-ray machines. Some of them even have CAT scans. It depends on what they have. But for many things, they can take care of it, and President Obama ceded to that, getting set up. Let's go to ESPN here. We're briefly the college playoffs that are taking place for national championship. Number 1, we have Alabama, then Clemson, and number 2, number 3, Notre Dame, and number 4, Georgia, number 5, Oklahoma, and number 6, Georgia State. Number 6, Ohio State, Georgia State. Anyway, some of the things are coming up here, and the committee, playoff selection committee, ranking retched up on Ohio State beating Michigan. So they want to put number 5 Oklahoma into the mix and push Ohio State down. Ohio State is, Ohio State has had a better win than Oklahoma, but the way it crushed the Wolverines 62-39 impressed anyone who watched. But the committee also takes other things into consideration, a long view, and how much money they can make. Before beating up on Michigan, Ohio State nearly lost to Maryland, the Terrapins. I remember that one. Now for Oklahoma, anyone who has tuned in this season understands that the defense there is worthless. Mike Stoops was fired there, and someone else inserted. They've given up an average of 446 yards. You won't win a national championship doing that. They're ranked number 5. That's Oklahoma by ESPN's Football Power Index. Ohio State is ranked number 6. Oklahoma ranks number 4 in strength schedule. Ohio State ranked number 48. Now, these are some things they look at, period. Oklahoma, I believe, plays Texas in their next game. Usually that would be already finished up. But now things go on literally forever. And about all we can say. Anyway, we gave that. So let's go to the National Basketball League last night. The Knickerbockers were in the Motor City. Pistons 115-108. And the Hawks were at the Heat. The Hawks 115-113. The Raptors were at the Grizzlies. Raptors 122. Here's MI to 114. And the Lakers and Nuggets in Denver, it was all Nuggets 117-86. And finally, the Pacers were in Phoenix. Pacers 109-104. For the Suns, the National Hockey League, known as the NHL, the Sharks and Sabres, it was in an overtime. It was a Sabres 3-2. The Senators and Flyers, the Senators actually flew by the Flyers. 4-3 was the final there. The Hurricanes and Canadiens, Hurricanes 2-1. The Ducks of Anaheim and the Lightning, I always liked that one. The Ducks of 3-1 was the final there. The Avalanche and Predators, it was the Avalanche 3-2. The Coyotes and Wild, it was the Coyotes over the Wild 4-3. And the Penguins of Pittsburgh, don't hear their names as much now, 4-3 over the Jets. The Golden Knights of, I think, Las Vegas, are they not? Anyway, they were 8-3 over the Blackhawks in Chicago. Stars and Oilers, it was the Oilers in an overtime, 1-0. Kings and Canucks, it was Kings 2-1 over the Canucks. And that is sports for the 28th of November 2018. Boston Red here from the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. We'll talk to you soon. Good day.